All right, Brent Porce here, topvelocity.net. We're going to talk about two arm actions that are really responsible for most arm injury. Now, arm injury is usually a result of the joint basically not being able to survive the load. The loads are typically in torques. Torques is a twisting force. And the two joints can be the shoulder, elbow, mainly where we see pattern of injury in baseball. Where the stress is so high, we start to see tears in the tendons, muscles, ligaments, and even into the soft tissue, labrum, stuff like that. So what are those arm actions? First, before we get into arm actions, the problem with the arms actions, a lot of times, not even so much the arm action, it's the loading rate, or how fast you're loading. So basically, if I'm going to put torque into a muscle, but I'm going to slowly do it over time, that muscle can better protect itself. When it happens really quickly, when the loading rate is really fast in a short amount of time, it's harder for that joint to protect itself. So you're going to find more injury in these arm paths in a faster loading rate than others. So keep that in mind the whole time. So what are the two arm paths? The two arm paths are going to be typically the arm not being allowed to or have enough time to really go through a good arm path. So what happens is one we talk about a lot is early trunk rotating. Going into front foot strike, wherever your arm may be, we're not going to worry about that right now. But if this glove starts pulling, like as you're landing, it's pulling and pulling your chest open, your arm is going to be forced to drag or hyperangulate, what we call where the arm pulls behind the back. So if we look at the skeleton, the reason that's a problem is because when this arm is up and pulls behind the back, there's nothing in the front of the scap to really hold it in socket, so it's literally trying to dislocate itself by going back here. That's why we don't want to pull elbow behind the back too long. It also is in a position where the wrist is supinated, and it's the same thing. It's kind of holding the ulnar open where the UCL is, putting stress right there on the ligament. So we're trying to really avoid getting behind the back too long. You can cock the arm behind the back, but if it stays back there too long, that's where the stress, it's a hard place for those joints to protect themselves. Once again, now add on that the loading rate. Do that really quickly. Now you have a mess. You have injury specifically over time. So if we early trunk rotate, good chance the arm drags, puts us in those very vulnerable, hyperangulated positions. I talked about that a lot. So if you see that, you see your chest open up and your elbow is behind your scapular plane or behind your back, your arm dragging, you're at a high risk of injury. The other one is basically, there's two ways we can load. We can load this way, so horizontal abduction to adduction, or we can load this way, external rotation to internal rotation. I always talk about this movement, external rotation, internal rotation, is a better movement to load into because it allows the trunk to move forward. This movement, quickly, action, reaction, the arm shoots forward and it cuts the trunk off. It stops the trunk because it gets ahead of the trunk. In this arm action, the layback action, it allows time to throw the trunk forward before the arm goes as the arm turns over. I also believe it links to high spin rates, the better you do that. It's also studies show that earlier you pronate, which is typically from a good trunk lean or trunk tilt, you reduce stress in the elbow, because where the elbow's in torque, in layback, when you turn it over, that's taking it out of torque, which typically why the earlier we do that is better. You're getting it out of torque quicker. So this, like I said, this overloading in external rotation can happen. Even though this is the better, external rotation, internal rotation is a better arm path, you can still overload there. How would you overload there? A lot of guys hear this, inverted W's, inverted L's. If I'm delaying, so if I'm going into front foot strike and I'm delaying external rotation, meaning I'm holding internal rotation really long, then what's going to happen is when I turn, my loading rate's going to be really high because I have to quickly lay back. So there you go, you get the loading rate. But also, if my trunk is too far ahead, kind of like an early trunk rotating, it's not only loading hard, but it's loading longer in external rotation because I delayed it getting into external rotation. If I was up more 53 degrees as I turn, it's going to lay back and want to more quickly start to transfer forward, kind of that plyometric effect, and it's not going to be held back and torqued back in external rotation so long. So to avoid that one is just not staying internally rotated too long, specifically if you're early trunk rotating or early tilting, to really slam it back in external rotation and over delay it or overload it in external rotation before pitch release. So if you see any dragging or delayed internal rotation, and you're really exaggerating external rotation because of that, going into pitch release, I would be very concerned about injury. That's where you're more than likely could put a red flag and say you're going to be way more prone to injury. So when I look at guys and I flag guys for injuries, or I call pro guys out for injury, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing those two movements happening. And with a pro guy who throws really hard, I don't even look for it to be that over-exaggerated. I look for small examples or small opportunities where I see it happening, and then I basically say I'm concerned about them, because those guys, pro guys, throw harder and they throw more over time, so their wear and tear is higher, so typically they're going to be more prone to injury. So hopefully that helps you understand where you can stay healthy. If you see any of that, the arm drags, the inverted W's to overloading, inverted L's to overloading external rotation, you need to fix that. If not, it's bound to happen. Your injury is going to come pretty quick. Speaking from a guy who tore his rotator cuff at 18, mainly because of both of those. I was technically doing both, so you can do both. And here's the thing, how do you fix that? That's what we do here. We learn things like hip to shoulder separation that give us more time to properly go through the pass, so it's not rushed, it's not, it's not dragging, it's not overloading, the loading rates are down. How do you calm down a loading rate? Same thing, separation, you give it time so it doesn't have to quickly get through the path. Then you bring down the loading rate, which is less torque, less stress. And that's the key. So if you identify that, you're going to need an approach like what we do with 3X pitching to work on things like better leg drives, better hip to shoulder separation, to give your arm the time to go through the path, because we want to build the energy up and transfer the energy with the arm, not try to load and generate the energy with the arm. That's how we keep guys healthy, and that's why at Top Velocity we have very, very, very little injury here. I definitely would say we don't have a pattern of injury, knock on wood, due to taking this approach. So if you want more information, topvelocity.net.